All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. The reason that I've come up with this talk is it's kind of a funny story. I'm going to go quick because we don't have a ton of time here today. I found this book in the library of the Builders Association. It said, How to Build Your Dream Home for Less Than $3,500. And I said, what? How? Well, it was written in 1950, of course. And this was also explaining how you self-build the home. So it just got my mind really zoned in on this topic because I was like, how could you build a house for $3,500? So it really got me thinking of, well, how much was the average income back then? And then how much is the average house now and what's the average income now? And that's what kind of spurred this whole presentation. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start with defining housing affordability and affordable housing, because a lot of people don't distinguish these as two different things. So housing affordability is basically making all housing affordable. And that's really what I want to talk about. Whereas affordable housing is basically half the median income in an area that can afford a home, okay, which is still important, but I want to make sure that we make all housing affordable and attainable to everyone. So our kids and our generations coming after us can have the same opportunity that we had. So as part of the presentation, I kind of break it down into three sections. So I kind of want to talk about the history of housing a little bit and how it came to be. And then I want to talk about the challenges that we have and then the solutions that we can, adopt to hopefully improve our situation. So I want to take you back to the 1950s, right? Because that was where we got that house for $3,500. Now, the actual cost to build a house, if you hired a builder, was somewhere around $9,000. So if you think back, I always think of like Leave It to Beaver, right? Okay, it was a family and it was the post-World War II era. There was a lot of emphasis on building homes to get all our troops back and get families settled. So they created these whole sets of regulations to promote more housing. Okay. And if you think back to these families, you had one worker and they had the wherewithal to buy a new home and then buy a new car and then buy all the appliances and buy the television. And they were able to do all that. Whereas nowadays, a young family just struggles even to afford the purchase of a home. So there's definitely a disparity here. And of course, when we look back at those 1950 standards, this would be like a typical 1950 subdivision, right? It's very square, it's flat. All the homes are nicely in a line in a row, and you're building on these nice flat lots. You got the wide streets, short setbacks, all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, we cannot do that anymore these days because we're not building on these types of sites. These sites were built by schools and churches and libraries. And now we're building a lot of, random sites that they're hilly and they have a lot of terrain and all sorts of things like that. Okay. And then this would be like a typical, 1950s house, $9,000 for that house. The average income in 1950 was around $4,700. So for roughly twice your income, you could have a house like this, 2 times your income. Now we look at today's cost. The average new home is in Waukesha County. I looked this up through MLS, $697,335 for a new construction home average sale price in MLS in 2022. Okay. And we talked a little bit about what's the average income. Luckily, in the last 2 years, that has went up. It used to be in the $65,000 range. It's went up to $82,757 for average income. Okay. So what does that equalize out? 8.4 times your average income is what the cost of a new home is right now compared to the 1950s. So you can see that gap and that disparity happening here. Okay. So a couple quick things here. I've got some stats on here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but there's a huge gap forming between existing homes and new construction homes. In 2018, it was $49,000. Now it's nearly $100,000 from what I've seen so far. And construction costs have increased 33% just since the start of the pandemic. And since the early 2000s, our housing prices have increased nearly 60%. Now we want to talk about cost burden. And that's interesting as well. So that means that over half your income is going to your living expense for your home. There's 123,000 plus households in Wisconsin that are cost burden. Now I want to put this in terms of the whole state of Wisconsin so you guys can see this. So let's look here. Here is the city of Appleton and Sheboygan. If you take the entire population of those two cities, that's how many people are cost burden in the state of Wisconsin. 2 full cities. So we know there's a problem. Now we're going to talk about some of the challenges that I see as a developer and things that we face. And some of these I'm going to move through quickly because they're a little bit more national issues and maybe not something that we're going to solve today in this room. I'm just going to point them out, talk about them very quickly, and then we're going to move on. So I've created 12 challenges to housing affordability. So as we've kind of referenced and we've kind of talked about this already is the development standards, right? We talked about the 1950 standard. And the problem is we always kind of go back to, well, why do we do it that way? Well, that's because that's the way we've always done it. Of course, that's the mindset that's kind of hurting us right now because we're taking those 1950 standard, 66-foot wide roads and all these things that we put on the books back then, and we're trying to apply them to, instead of A sites like I was showing before, B and C sites that are hilly and they're wooded and they have wetland areas and all sorts of other challenges. It just doesn't work. And then, of course, what are we doing with new houses these days? With new houses, yeah, we have 75-foot setbacks. We have wider lots, bigger lots, more streets. And of course, most people now have 3, maybe even 4-car garages. So why do we need to park all our cars on the street when we've got a 75-foot long driveway and a 4-car garage? Why do we need all these big wide streets to park cars on when nobody parks their cars on the streets anymore? So that's some of the stuff that we have to kind of address and get through. The second thing is legislation. And unfortunately, we keep going the wrong direction with this as well. So if we look at a study, and I do have recent numbers here from NAHB. So in 2022, the cost added to a new home from local, state, and federal regulation was $93,870. That's before we even put a shovel in the ground. That's basically enough to buy like a brand new Corvette Stingray. So every time you buy a house or build a house. So obviously that's a huge challenge, and 2/3 of that cost is on the land development side. So obviously I think that's where we have some room to work with. Those costs continue to increase. In 2015, those costs went up 25%. And just in the short period of time, they've continued to go up. That used to be an 84,000 number. So we just continue to go the wrong direction with that number. And then what does this mean in terms of Wisconsin? Well, if you add $1,000 to the cost of a new home, back in 2020, it took out about 3,400 home buyers from even being able to afford a home. That's just $1,000. So now it's almost 4,300 home buyers in 2022 that are priced out of that home. So dollars matter. All right, we'll talk about impact fees. It's another favorite topic that we have, especially at our local home builders association. We've had some really, I think, very good meetings recently about that. Impact fees add a lot to the cost of a new home. Of course, the municipality wants to put those in place to maybe take care of improvements that are going to be needed in the future. But the challenge with impact fees is, one is, are they actually used for what they're supposed to do? Are they actually documented? And then in our group, we asked the question, because if they aren't used after a certain amount of time, they're supposed to get refunded. Well, we had 50 to 60 people in a room, and we asked the question, have any of you ever gotten a check back from your municipality for impact fees? Raise your hand. And no hands went up. And so we're working through that a little bit as well. But some of these impact fees can add a lot to the cost of a home. They range from $2,000 to, I've paid one for $21,000 in the village of Heartland, just for permits and impact fees, which you just think of how much money and what that could have went to instead for the home. Okay. Another big challenge is skilled labor. And we've alluded to this already today, but roughly half our labor force left the industry in the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, 2009, however long that went on. And the problem is we're seeing the average age of our workers increase steadily. So the average age of a construction worker was 39 years old. It's now jumped to 42 and a half years old. And the average age of a builder is 59 and a half years old. All right. We're not replacing people in the skilled trades with younger people. We just keep trotting out the same older people, and they're going to retire soon, and we're really going to have a problem. Now, we've lost a lot of tech education in our schools over those years, because when the school budgets got tighter, guess what went first? The tech program. So we have almost a decade of students that maybe weren't exposed to the trades as much as they were in the past. And when we hit that great recession the last time, a lot of the people that are in the construction industry, it's not always stable work. So they had to go get day jobs. I had these two really great Finnish carpenters. They actually lived in an apartment right across from our office building, and they both had to get manufacturing jobs. And they never came back into the industry. So how do you teach someone that's never mitered, a corner or installed a window? You can't just throw them on the job site and say, hey, go figure it out. That's institutional knowledge that gets passed down and passed down. And we lost a lot of that with the recession and, getting kids out of the industry. Average age of a construction worker has went up from $38,300 to $44,000, $44,900 actually in 2022. So we are seeing some wage growth there, but still, you look at what they get paid, and I think the difficulty and the challenge of that work, it's not always alluring to kids to get in the trades. So we put an APB out for anyone that wants to get involved in the construction industry. We're looking for you right now. So let's talk about another kind of disparity. And you guys alluded to this. Kurt did kind of touch on it very briefly. This is the next challenge to housing affordability, and that's land availability. And there's something really crazy that happened. So in 2017, we permitted more new homes than the number of lots that we created. And this was the first time in over 12 years that happened in the metro Milwaukee area. Now, if you've ever done development, went through development process, typically it takes about 2 years, if you're lucky, to get everything through and get it to the point where you can actually start breaking ground on it. So we get back to that, answer the quiz, right? Speed. So what is this doing for us, the fact that we're not creating enough lots? Well, I just looked again in MLS in data. The average new lot right now in 2022 sold for nearly $200,000 for a vacant lot. Okay. And in 2020, it was $154,000. So it's up nearly 30% in just 2 years because we're not producing enough new lots and new land to make up for what we're building. And as Kurt again alluded to in his talk, in 2021, we built about 5,700 lots, but we permitted 11,700 homes. So building double the homes as amount of the lots that we've created. And the same thing in 2022, we built about 5,800 lots and permitted 11,300 homes. That's obviously not sustainable. Okay. And that's partly what's driving up the cost of these lots as well. I studied the 2000s to 2010 era, and the medium lot price basically from that time period went up about $25,000, so about 35%. Then I looked at the next decade, 2010 to 2019, the medium lot went up 17,000. So not quite so bad because that was as we're kind of coming out of the recession. But just in the last 3 years now, the median lot price went up $46,000, over 30%. We're not producing enough lots. Okay. And of course, I kind of alluded to this already, so I'm going to jump through it. We're working on these B and C sites, but we're applying these A site standards to these lots, and it's not fitting, it's not working, it's driving up the cost. So I kind of joke, but this is kind of what we're trying to build on right now. These wooded lots that are really, hilly, or we're building on lots with tons of wetlands and natural resources where you really can't build on that. All right, this one I'm going to go quick through. This is not maybe an issue we're going to solve today, but it is a challenge. Obviously, tariffs on housing. 2018 was a very difficult year for us with regards to that. We had the 20% lumber tariff on Canada. Somehow the prices went up 60%. I don't know, I'm not a mathematician, but there was definitely some other things going on there. It added about $9,000 to the cost of a new home. Then we had the 20% steel tariff. And then we had a 25% tariff on Chinese goods. And boy, I never realized, you think when you're building a home, there's not that much stuff from China in a home, but there certainly is. You got cabinets, wood floors, hardware, light fixtures, quartz countertops, appliances, all those kind of things. So that all added to our costs of homes. Actually, I'm going to give you one stat because I think this is interesting. So when we did the tariffs and they put them back to 20%, so Trump dropped them to 11%, and then we went up to 20%, it added another $7,000 to the cost of a new home. All right. The next challenge to housing affordability is the mentality or NIMBYism. This is a huge challenge that we're dealing with. Obviously, when you go to get a development approved, you're going to your village board or your town hall meetings, and you have to produce your subdivision. And of course, you send the letters out to all your neighbors, and they get to come and yell at you for the next 3 hours. That's at least what happened to me. So I'm used to being the bad guy, but you hear all these things. You know, you're going to cause light pollution and noise pollution and all these things. Now, we did create the Developer Bill of Rights, and that bill, actually, I got to use it when I was doing my last development. And while that worked and created some certainty, it basically said that you have to, as a person that's complaining about the subdivision, you have to be able to provide factual basis for why this shouldn't happen. But at the same time, that also puts the burden back on the developer that I also have to provide facts. So I had to get traffic studies, and I had to do all these things. I had to bring an appraiser in and all these things to refute all the statements that these neighbors were making. And the funny thing is, the subdivision that I was doing, I was looking to reduce the square footage. This is a brand new subdivision by 100 square feet. And you would have thought that I was, drowning babies or something. That's how vehemently they were opposed to this, over 100 square feet. But I actually showed them the cost of these new homes was going to be well over $100,000 more than anything that had sold in their subdivision. But, that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with. So we got to get away from not in my backyard and get into yes in my backyard. I'm going to pick on the city of Waukesha for this one. This is another kind of thing that's happened. Now, we should be happy, right? They've got this really nice apartment project. It says, what's happening on the corner of White Rock and Moreland? A new affordable housing development called Frame Park Commons is coming. This development will consist of 2 apartment buildings featuring different style apartments. Apartments are not affordable housing. Apartments are rentals. So I took an issue with this because I even contacted them and said, you're wrong here. That's a rental unit. That's not affordable housing. Affordable housing is something that someone would own. So it's just kind of, again, sometimes we got to watch the wording of what we're saying out there, because it does make a difference. Another problem, I don't think we're going to solve this one today, but buyer preferences is another challenge, right? We've got all these TV shows, we've got Instagram, we've got TikTok, all these things that people are showing, Pinterest and House, showing all these things, and everybody wants, the next Instagram worthy house, and they want to one up everybody else and show off. And, you show these shows too, and they're like, hey, we're going to rebuild this whole house in 24 hours for, under $10,000 or whatever. And we know that that's just not even feasible, right? Some of these shows, they don't include the labor, they get discounted materials, and they're just showing, the donated material cost, but it creates this false expectation among home buyers. Now, what's this, you ask? Anyone have a guess what this is? Planned unit development. Okay. Okay. You're close. So this could either be the development process, or this could be the permit process for a new home. Either way, it's really complex. Okay. So that's the next challenge that we're dealing with: complexity of process. There are so many things that you have to do, and there's no uniformity whatsoever in the development process. If I'm going to develop in Village of Waukesha, where I do a lot of stuff, or I'm developing even just in the city of Waukesha, which is not very far away, it's a completely different process. And I develop in Muskego or West Bend or wherever, everybody's got a completely different process. You have to relearn and figure everything out every single time. And heaven forbid the board changes or the rules change, or how many times have the staff changed at a local level. You have a different engineer, a different attorney, and they go and change the whole process again. So you could even redevelop in the same area 2 years later, and you've got a completely different set of processes to follow. This is why it takes so darn long to create a subdivision. And then the building permits, it's the same thing. It's typically 120 to 140 days to go through the entire permit process to get a home, with all the documentation you have to get, the wall bracing, the heat calcs, and the engineering. And now you got to get a zoning permit and all these things. It just takes forever and ever. And as we've seen, like last couple of years, with all the challenges in the pricing and the lumber costs, when you take 3 months, try to figure out a price on a home over 3 months when the lumber prices are just shooting up and down every single day. It's a real challenge. This slide here, trying not to be political, but just talking about the pandemic fueled inflation. This was just a good slide to show. Obviously, 6.5% inflation rate recently. Gas prices, in the twos, now up to the mid threes, kind of back down a little bit now. The fixed rate mortgage, we were at that 265, those golden handcuffs that we talked about. Now we're in the 6% range plus for a 30-year fixed mortgage. Fuel costs went up from 16.5% to 41.5%. Prices at the grocery store, 3.7% increase now to 11.8%. Even the cost of electricity is almost up 14.3%. And earnings on average have decreased. So our consumers are now even more financially pinched than they were before. And especially when we talk about that millennial buyer, how are they going to be able to afford a down payment on a home when they see all their costs rise this quickly? The next challenge, you may have seen this. I'm fairly outspoken on LinkedIn. I've posted this picture. It went viral all over the internet. This was when lumber was crazy, but we have all the supply chain issues that were going on, still kind of persist to this day. People weren't getting it. There was nothing happening on it. And I said, I'm going to try and relate this to something that people can understand. So I went to my lumber yard and said, I want $1,000 worth of lumber in today's cost. And then I went back and calculated pre-pandemic what $1,000 worth of lumber would have got you. And I said, I want to put them side by side. I had no clue what this was going to look like. I just was like, I think this is going to be interesting from a visual. So that's what it was. And that is how stark a difference that was. So this was back in, if we go back into February of 2021, that was probably the absolute peak of lumber. I had a little house that we built before. It was a 1,900 square foot house, so nothing major. And I paid $115,000 for the lumber package on it. And I had a bigger house in 2020 that I built that was like 4,000 square feet, and we paid $50,000 for that lumber. So here I was in Savannah, Georgia. This is I think the second largest port. And it was funny because we're sitting on the side of the road, or not the road, but the street here. They have the street walk. And all of a sudden a ship came in with all these containers. Everybody starts clapping and cheering because we're actually getting ships back in to the country. There were 70 ships sitting in the ocean that couldn't get in. So this was, again, the 2021 timeframe. And, obviously trying to get things open, get the shipping, get the products back in. So I was really happy to see. I was hoping there was lumber on that ship. But we still have supply chain issues to this day. Windows, it's still hard to get windows for homes. You have time. Obviously interest rates, we've talked about that, huge spike in that as well. And then we have some new challenges ahead. I'm going to go really fast now, but I want to say housing pays for itself. And this is really one of the things we got to take back to our municipalities. When you create 1,000 homes, that creates $298 million in income. And that creates $56 million in taxes and revenue to your state and local government. So what is $56 million? What would that buy you? Well, you could buy this private island here, Darby Island here in the Bahamas and the Caribbean for $46 million. And you still have, $8 to $10 million to improve it. So that's how much money 1,000 houses can generate for your municipality. And the thing is with houses is that they pay for themselves afterwards too. So 15 years later, the NAHB did a study. They generated $351 million in revenue as opposed to $223 million in costs. So still a net positive there. All right, I'm going to go quick to the solutions and then we'll turn it over to you guys. One of the big solutions, as I mentioned earlier, density. This is Houston. I visited this. This was a more affordable housing community. They do it very different. They do the opposite. So they do, instead of minimum lot sizes, they do maximum lot sizes, 45 foot, 55 foot, 65 foot wide lots. That's all you can have. Now, I wouldn't say that I would necessarily want to live in this or necessarily build it. But, here you can see these houses are 5 feet apart. They're 3 and 4 stories. But again, density. Showing tighter setbacks, shorter houses up the front. Again, this is in Houston. So we got to reimagine our development standards. We've got to create more certainty in our development process, moving along faster. We've got to get private industry and government working together. This is a big solution that I'd like to throw out to the panel. taxes and tax burdens on vacant lots. Part of the reason I don't develop a lot of lots anymore, I develop them in smaller chunks because I don't want to get stuck holding the property tax on these lots for 3 and 4 years at $2,000 a lot. So I limit the number of lots that I create. If there's a way to reduce or suspend some of the taxes on these vacant lots until we get an occupancy permit, I think that's something we need to talk about, because then I would create more lots and that would also drive down my cost. The other thing that I want to just briefly mention, obviously cap and code limit or limits on code changes. Don't take the government cheese as it is. And what I mean by that is right now in the infrastructure bill, the federal government is incentivizing local municipalities to do stretch codes and expand their codes. But I'm saying right now, if you're a municipal person, don't take the government cheese. Don't take that government money, because all you're doing is, again, driving up the cost of housing even further. And then the last thing, don't pander to climate change or fear mongering. That's where a lot of this stuff is coming from. They're trying to ban gas stoves, trying to get rid of, gas in homes, and they're trying to go with electrification, which we don't even have the power on the grid to handle that as well. And then deregulate. We got to drastically reduce regulations. It's like an onion. It just gets more and more layers. We got to peel back those layers and start to reduce it and simplify that process. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with as an example, I was talking with Carl Harris, who is going to be the chairman of NHB next year. He's in Wichita, Kansas. And we had a conversation. What's the average lot price in your area? And I said, well, it's $200,000. He goes, ours is $50,000. And then we had this whole conversation about the development process. And the long and short of it is, this is another idea to drive down cost. What he had suggested was, in his area, the municipality actually will pay for the cost of the development. And then when the lot is built on, then the developer would then pay back the government for that portion of the development cost. Instead, what we have right now is, I as a developer have to buy the land. I then have to pay for all the infrastructure. I then have to bond all the costs of the infrastructure plus 20%. So now I'm basically shelling out all this money, and then all the way as I'm developing the subdivision, the municipality is telling me they don't like this, they want me to do this, and it's all adding cost. And then if something breaks or gets damaged, they make me fix it right away. Then when I'm all done with it, they make me fix it again until they like it. And then they say, okay, thank you. We're going to take your road that you paid for, and you're still on the hook for it for 2 more years. So all we've done is put the entire burden of the development on the developer. And it's just increased the cost, and it's taken a lot of people out of the market. We've got to make it more accessible for people to develop land. So that's it.